Recently, I was perusing the used shelf of my friendly local game store and I came across this, the Black Templar Castellan, our unique lieutenant. He's a little tiny bit worse than a regular lieutenant in that he can't take a power fist, sad face, but he's 5 points cheaper in game, smiley face. This guy is so wickedly cool, he is pulled straight from the pages of John Blanche's original Warhammer 40,000 illustrations. He is immaculate. The only problem with this guy is he is incredibly monopose. His shoulders are fused to his chest, his legs are fused to his cape, even his power axe is attached to his backpack with cabling. This model is a one and done. There's no way I'm gonna be able to get a second one and kitbash and convert him into a different lieutenant. I would like to have more than one Castellan in my army. And so instead of buying this model again, I'm gonna have to get a little bit more creative. And it's not even from 40K. This is a Legion Praetor with Power Sword from 30K. There's clearly some old Mechanicus funky tech inspiration with the Games Workshop Castellan, so what better place to find a similar vibe than the old weird wackiness of 30K? I never got into the Horus Heresy game. I love the books, but I went so hard into Space Marines for 40K that there isn't enough room in my heart for another collection of Space Marines. This kit is very similar to the 40K one, just a wee bit smaller in scale, and ever so slightly different design to the Space Marine armor. It has plenty of fun details though, maybe a bit too fun. There's this flowery trim thing going on. It's very regal, but in the grim darkness of the far future, they're probably more brutal in their design, so I sliced it off the knee using a sanding twig to get it smooth. He also has a humongous belt buckle, which is perfect. The 40K Castellan has a bit of a gut as well, it just needs the 30K iconography scraped away. He's got some nice thigh armor with some small pouches and daggers to go on his belt, and a very interesting power plant. The 30K Legion banner has to go though. To cape or not to cape? I almost bought this model for the cape because it's a really cool cape, but it's given real chapter master vibes. And this guy isn't even a chapter master. He's not even a captain. He is a lieutenant. Actually, he's not even a lieutenant. He is a Castellan. I think I got to leave off the cape. That is gonna create some more problems because the cape is tied into the shoulder pads, and I do kind of like these funky shoulder pads, but I think I can work around it. Another detail I thought I wanted was this epic relic power sword. It's hilariously big. But when I look at it now, all I see is the Ice Toa sword from Bionicle. I had that one when I was a kid. Instead, this might be an opportunity to try to get some more Templar goodness on this fig. I found a left-handed power axe, a perfect stand-in for a Castellan's mastercrafted power weapon. I cut the axe off at the hand, cleaning it up around the fingers of the Praetor, and then very carefully drilled a hole through the shaft of the axe. This is nerve-wracking because these small drill bits are fragile. One of these drill bits is permanently trapped inside of my Helbrex Crozius because it snapped off in there. I inserted a sewing pin into the handle and sandwiched the two parts together with lots of super glue, and now it should be a rock-solid connection. Another thing I don't really have to change, but I kinda want to, is this Volkite gun. I think this is a perfectly fine proxy for a combi weapon, but this is another way I can combi him up. I found a combi flamer bit and I got it ready, drilling out the gun barrel, and then I cut off everything I could of the Volkite, leaving behind the handle and the power cylinder thing that all the hoses run into. On the combi weapon, I did the opposite, cutting off the gun butt and handle. This was tricky because snipping off these parts would stretch and damage the rest of the gun, so I used my little handsaw to perfectly cut away these parts. After lots and lots of sanding and fine tuning, it was a perfect fit, and you would never know this is not the original gun. And I really like the power cables running up his arms. I attached this weapon arm, and now he's ready for some hardcore crusading. Next up, my classic Templars skulls. These are the skulls of the suit's previous owner, who died gloriously in battle and now crusade eternally nailed to the power plant. I used cut-down sewing straight pins for the nails. Now to get those shoulders situated. The Games Workshop Castellan has massive shoulder pads. I found some Templars shoulder pads meant for Gravis Space Marines on the Black Templar upgrade frame, and I attached these with little balls of green stuff to help them sit properly. And I ended up putting on a little Templar shoulder shield. Now for the head, and the Praetor kit comes with a lovely beaky helmet. I don't have nearly enough beaky helmets in my Templar army, so I'm gonna keep it. The only problem is it has this big dent on top where the Praetor's big Roman mohawk is meant to live. So I used some green stuff to fill this up and smooth it out. I really like my custom Castellan. I think he really closely matches the vibes of the GW one. And why does the GW Castellan look like this? Because he looks really different than your average Space Marine. Well, the reason for that is that's just how John Blanche decided to draw him all those years ago. But I like to think it goes a little bit deeper than that. I think the Castellans are the geezers of the Black Templars. Hierarchy within the Black Templars is a little bit different than your standard Codex compliant Space Marine chapter. Marshals are in command of entire crusades, which can be a couple hundred to a couple thousand battle brothers, but the actual day-to-day operations of the fighting companies is left up to the Castellans. Leading a frontline charge is a young man's game, but the actual day-to-day operations and logistics of the different fighting forces is in the capable hands of the old-timers, the geezers, the oldest amongst the chapter. Wearing cobbled together suits of heresy pattern armor, these old-timers tell all of the young initiates what to do. And before this guy can be telling my initiates what to do, I gotta get him on a base.
He's all built and looking lovely. Now to give him a base. The Castellans stand on 40mm bases, and since hierarchy in 40k is determined by height, I want to add some to the base. I took some birch bark I got from the hardware store and started building this up. This gave me something natural looking, but I need to make sure his feet have a nice flat spot for standing, so I used some cork to make some ledges for his feet to go on. Then I drilled and added some pins so this model is running straight through the wood into the base and will never fall off. Then to smooth over the ground, I took some milliput and made some little mounds of this, covering them in a layer of wood glue and then sprinkling on some small pebbles and fine-grained sand.
Ooh, I don't know which one I like more, mine or Games Workshop's. I mean, I wouldn't have made mine this way if I hadn't seen the original Games Workshop one, but now that I see them side by side, they're pretty darn close. I think I need to see some paint on them before I know for sure.
I threw some black primer over my Space Marine, the classic first step of any black Templars, and then I hit him with a Zenithal Prime. My Templars are marching through the dry desert, and so this Zenithal represents the hot blazing sun hitting them when it's at its zenith. Now to start coloring them in, I grab my Black Templar soup. This is a mix I've made of mostly Games Workshop Black Templar, a healthy amount of Leviathan Blue, and some Lamian Medium to make it just a little bit less intense. I painted this over his black armor. Games Workshop contrast paint dries really fast, so I find it's best to work quickly section by section. Just his calves, and then his entire hip, and then his entire belly, and then his right arm. This way the paint goes on and has time to settle before it dries, so I can get that contrast effect. Now on the rank and file initiates, I would stop here, but for a hero, I like to go the extra mile. I put blue, black, and white on my palette to make some highlight colors. The blue desaturated will perfectly match my Templars mix, and then I can apply some highlights following the contrast that the Zenithal and contrast paint have already gotten started for me. The first layer was a gray that is as bright as the brightest spots of my contrast, and then I kept pushing it brighter and brighter, putting on less and less paint over the same spots to make his armor look nice and shiny. I always imagine my Black Templars as having shiny black armor that is getting hit by the desert sun. After many layers, the last step was to put tiny dots of almost white to really give a nice reflection to the armor. Now that the black is done, it's time to move on to the brown details. I grabbed my skeleton horde and put this over any cloth, the shoulder pads, and the skulls. Then I grabbed some wildwood, a dark red brown, and put this over the leather straps, and I glazed this thin down over the tan areas to darken these elements. Now for some highlights, I mixed up a tan color using skeleton horde and wildwood contrast paint, and I started highlighting a lot like on the armor. But I used much more irregular scratchy brushstrokes to give these parts a texture unique from the smooth armor. Now to do a little cleanup work in preparation for all the metal parts. On the Games Workshop Castellan, the big X-shaped harness got a coat of gray and then some rattling grime to get it ready for a gunmetal detail. And on my Praetor, he's getting a Black Templar belly button. I put a white decal on using some tans and browns from my palette to blend it in with the rest of the paint job. I picked out the gold things with gold paint and used wildwood contrast paint to darken these, hiding them with a mix of silver paint with my original gold to brighten them up.
The reason I'm painting up some Castellans is because I've been playing Warhammer 40,000 at 1,000 points. Usually, a typical game is 2,000 points, and if I have 2,000 points to spend and I'm buying an HQ, I'm buying Helbrecht, because he's one of the best HQs in the entire game. Now, he's 130 points by himself, but really, to get the most out of Helbrecht, you should buy him a Crusader squad or a Sword Brethren squad, so that's another 150 points. And then that's all of a sudden a pretty big investment in your army, and so you want to make sure that it actually gets to do the thing it wants to do, so you end up buying him a Land Raider for 220 points, and then all of a sudden you've got a 500 point murder brick that can kill just about anything in the entire game. Although your opponent also has 2,000 points to spend, so they probably built something that can kill almost anything in the entire game. When you only have 1,000 points to work with, almost every datasheet gets recontextualized. Helbrecht becomes too expensive, but the little 60-point Castellan is looking mighty interesting. Attach him to a 75-point Assault Intercessor squad, and then you've got a little 135-point unit that is rerolling wound rolls of 1, lethal hits, and fallback and charge, a particularly useful ability in low points games because you don't have that many units, and so you want your units to have the maximum flexibility. Instead of being stuck in combat for a couple of turns, with fallback and charge, you can just do whatever you want every single turn. The Castellans are pretty darn interesting at low points games.
I threw some Rattling Grime over the weapons, and speaking of those weapons, I love bringing a little John Blanche Zorn palette into my Templars. And so for the combi weapons, I'm thinking yellow with red accents. After a yellow base coat, I used Kydian Flesh Tone to darken the yellow, and I also put this on his little shoulder shield. Then I started painting on a little Hot Rod red flames coming off of the front of the gun. This is a combi flamer, so it doesn't only shoot incendiary bolt shells, but it also literal fire. With the red and yellow done, I did some highlights on the metal with some gray and white paint, and while I had red on my palette, I hid his eyes. Beaky helmets for some reason always look really mean. I made the red spilling out of his lenses like his eyes are glowing. Now for the melee weapons. I don't know why, but all melee handles across my entire Templar collection are purple, and this Castellan's will match. I hit the ends of my Templar crosses with some gold, and now for the power weapons. I base coated it in blue and then mixed in some ice yellow into the blue to highlight the blade part. Then I mixed more light blue into the mixture, doing some edge highlights, and then I mixed more light blue, keeping going, picking 2 spots along the edge to make them brighter. I did some little lightnings coming off the power cables and kept highlighting until eventually I was using pure white paint.
I think I've just unlocked something with power weapons. I usually try to paint power weapons very scientifically. I'll prepare on my palette a spectrum of colors from very dark blue to very light blue, and then I'll put it all on the model and then try to push and pull it and blend all of my colors so that I have a nice gradient going, and it takes a really long time. This time, painted it blue, and then added just a little bit of ice yellow, and then painted on the highlights. And once that looked good, I added a little bit more ice yellow, more highlights, a little bit more ice yellow, more highlights, more ice yellow, and then it was done. It's like the fastest power weapon I've ever painted, and it's probably the best one.
I did the second power weapon in exactly the same way. I'm really liking introducing lightning into my blades. This is something unique I do on my power axes, and I would like to figure out a way to get it onto the power swords as well. It all depends on the shape. On Games Workshop's Castellan, I had much more room for lightning, but there's something to the smaller, subtler highlights of the Praetor's axe. And you know what else looks good with some lightning? That's right, EonsOfBattle.com. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find our merch, like our new Nick and J dice, and the best way to support us doing what we do with a membership. Each month, members will get a credit that they can use on our new monthly terrain packs or any previous pack we have ever made. For the month of February, we made the Grim Battlefield basing bits, and we're making them for real, available as physical printed packs or as digital STLs. These Grim bits are the perfect thing for your dark miniatures to stand on. War-torn scenery isn't as easy to pull off as texture paste in a grass tuff, but with these bits, it's easy to give your minis the grim dark treatment. With a selection of sandbag and barbed wire barriers, ruined walls, smashed stained glass, unexploded ordnances, and more. All sized perfectly to complement any size of miniature, from giving an upgrade to your small rank and file troopers, all the way up to big chunks of debris for filling up monster and vehicle bases. You can do it with the Grim Battlefield basing bits. There were just a few details left hiding here and there on these figs. The Games Workshop Castellan has a little belly button cross that I picked out with red. And on the back of his power plant, he has a skull nailed down with a candle sitting on top of it, and I highlighted these with the leftover tan and white from my palette. Now my fellows are complete, I need to add the metallics. And before that, a nice satin varnish will keep my colors nice and vibrant and let the metallics shine. I sponged on some paint chips of silver paint over the bodies and did some dry brushing of this silver over the metal parts. Now for those bases. My Templar bases are super easy, barely an inconvenience. I started out with very watery airbrushing of Vallejo earth. For this first step, it's very important how I did the zenithal. The Games Workshop Castellan base got a much bigger blast and more of the base is flat, so it looks more orange. Where the Praetor's base is much rounder and didn't get hit as much with the white, so it looks a lot more darker and desaturated. This variety across my collection makes the bases look more natural. After the airbrushing, I did a dry brushing of Pro Acryl Olive Flesh, letting this hit on their legs and feet so they look just as dusty as the bases, and then after that, the only thing left was to rim the bases with a glossy black paint. Ooh, I don't know which one I like more. I mean, the 40k one, the real one, is the reason that I wanted to get some Castellans, but I really like the one that I invented. Like if I was playing a game and I wasn't bringing 2 lieutenants or 2 Castellans, I would probably bring mine and leave this guy on the shelf. They look really, really good together. I definitely don't need a 3rd Castellan, but I do kind of want to keep looking at 30k and see what fun stuff I can kind of port over into 40k. Space Marines are in kind of a weird spot. They have 25 characters, and that's 25 characters if you don't include any of the named characters. That is 25 just generic heroes that you might take in your list because they're all kind of good. Obviously, I've subtracted out the librarians because I would never take a librarian because librarians are icky. But 25 different characters. 5 of those guys are lieutenants. There's Lieutenant in Reaver armor, there's Lieutenant in Phobos armor, there's Castellan, and then there's Lieutenant with combi weapon, who is a different type of lieutenant. He's a lone op, he's pretty darn good. But ooh, I like my little Castellans. One of them is legit, one of them is my own invention, and I like them both. But I think I like mine just a little bit more.